Mute
See
that
what
tab.
happens. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mute the other tab if it'll come up in a second here.
Do it.
Let's see. Okay, good. It always takes a minute.
Yeah, it hasn't started on my tab yet.
Yeah, mine took a
Mine's,
minute too.
Loading. There we go.
All right, awesome.
Yay.
Great. So normally what we do is we just kind of wait a few minutes because not everybody gets here right away. So we can kind of hang out for a little bit. Think of anything that you want to like bring up for the discussion in particular. Yeah, and just kind of get ready for Mansfield Park.
Really excited to talk about this one.
Yes, I feel like we're all gonna have like some capital O opinions, and I am excited for it.
Hot take.
Yes. I'm really excited about this.
Also, I feel like we can mention this at the end of the live show as well, but I would really like to thank you, Hana, for like running the Instagram and doing like an amazing job.
I'm not doing anything special.
Yes. I had that in my notes of like to specifically thank you because it always looks so pretty. It's like I have done nothing.
Most of the pictures aren't mine, so I'm not doing anything special.
I mean, you're still moderating it though, which is huge help. So
it's much more than I can say for the Twitter. So
I know this social media thing. Like you'd think I'd remember like how to use it or to use it, but it doesn't always happen. Okay. I also feel like the YouTube tracking like how many people are watching is never correct. So that's another good reason we wait a couple minutes. But okay. I say we give it maybe like 2 or 3 more minutes and then we can jump in with introductions.
There's a lag on the YouTube, right?
Yes, the YouTube page is going to lag. So what I tend to do is if I'm not hosting it, I keep the actual StreamYard page kind of half screen, and then the other half of the screen I have the YouTube broadcast so I can see the comments. So I'm still like talking to you guys in real time, and I'm not getting distracted by the lagging video.
Okay.
That's at least what I have found that works pretty well.
I have now done that, so.
Great.
Perfect.
Okay. So I think we can go ahead and start with our introductions, at least, as people continue to show up. So welcome, everybody. My name is Kara, and you're here on my channel, which is Wild Book Garden, and we are all very excited to discuss Mansfield Park today. This was our April book for Austen Anonymous, and we're going to kind of start how we've been doing every live show with our guests introducing themselves, talking a little bit about their channel or their Instagram, and the kind of content that they do, a little bit to plug their channel or their blog, and also just a little bit about your guys' background with Austen, like if you have a specific like story about how you got into Austen or Mansfield Park in particular. And as Taylor pointed out, a special thank you to Hana for moderating our Austen Anonymous Instagram page, because otherwise we would have 0 Instagram presence. So we appreciate you for that. Hana, do you want to go ahead and get started? And we can go Julia and then Taylor and me.
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Hana from the Bookstagram account of Lynn Hermione, formerly of the YouTube channel, but not anymore. I read a little bit of everything and a bit of YA fantasy. And I read Mansfield Park for the first time when I was 12 or 13. I read all of Austen's the main 6 novels in pretty quick succession. And Mansfield Park was my least favorite at the time. And so I basically haven't thought about it again until now.
Awesome.
Yeah. Julia, go ahead.
Well, yes, I'm Julia. My channel and Instagram are both Shakespeare and such, and I'm sort of the same, read a little bit of everything, a fair bit of classics, a lot of Shakespeare, as the name might suggest. But yeah, definitely a fan of like classics and sort of historical fiction in general. I did not read Austen when I was young. I saw the like Emma miniseries and then got it from the library and I was like, I'm going to read it. And I think I was maybe like in 9th grade or something. And my 13-year-old brain was like, don't understand it. Give it up. So I didn't read Austen until like adulthood. And this is now, well, this and Northanger Abbey were the last two I had yet to read. So now I only have Northanger Abbey yet to read of all her 6 main works. But Mansfield Park is actually my favorite Austen adaptation. The 1999 movie is just, I love it. So I'm really excited, and I was not disappointed.
Great.
Awesome.
Taylor.
Hi, I'm Taylor from Page Screen Taylor. I have a YouTube channel where I also talk about books of all genres, but recently I've been leaning heavily towards adult romance. I have been a Jane Austen fan since I was 14. It brought me out of my Twilight phase. Thank you. I read Sense and Sensibility and my life was changed. And so as of Austen Anonymous, I had read all of her main works, all of her surviving letters, all of her Love and Friendship collection, Lady Susan. I read all of it except for Mansfield Park. That was the one I was really dragging my feet on. And so I'm happy to have finally read it and happy to say that I have written literally everything Jane Austen has written.
Yes. Great. Yeah, that is exciting. So I'm Kara, and you guys have probably heard this bit a lot now, but I've grown up with Jane Austen. Like I genuinely don't remember a time when I didn't know the story of Pride and Prejudice in my sleep. Like literally my sister and I, when we were sick at home, we would like fall asleep on the couch watching the BBC miniseries because that was like our comfort food. Like my mom has always been a huge Jane Austen fan, and she passed that down to us. And actually, very similarly to Hana, I had read Mansfield Park last, and it was my least favorite. And kind of like you were saying, I just like didn't think about it much after that. And it wasn't until I read it again for a class I took in college that I started appreciating it more. Like it still wasn't my favorite, but I saw a lot more, I think, value and enjoyment in it than I had before. And this time around, I feel like I've enjoyed it even more. So I feel like it's one of her novels that really lends itself to rereading, which I think all of them do. But I feel like this is the one that I've had the most drastic changes in my experience with it. So I'm very excited to talk about it in great detail. And by the way, all of these lovely people will be linked in the description box. So be sure to check out their channels and their blogs afterwards. They're all wonderful. And I am really excited to discuss with you guys. So I think we'll kind of start out with a general, like, how did you feel about the book? And especially about Fanny as a main character. Because I feel like that's a big point of discussion for people with this book. So let's go ahead and start with Julia first.
Okay, great. Because I feel like I haven't spoken to a lot of people about Mansfield Park, but I feel like the general consensus is like Fanny is an unpopular protagonist of Jane Austen's works. I am personally offended because I think she's the Austen protagonist I relate the most to. So I was like, okay, ouch, people don't like my personality. Thanks. But I mean, like, I get it. She doesn't have like the sass of Emma or Elizabeth, but I think there's something to be said for this girl who gets put out of her element and is intimidated and constantly made to feel like she's lesser than everyone she's around, and she still makes the best of it and like has a good attitude towards things, and she's like, I think she's likable. I like her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hana, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I remember like when I read them all together, I was thinking like she was so boring and like completely had nothing to her. But this time, like Julia, I related to her so much. She has such a strong moral compass, even, and how she hates conflict so much, and she's so quiet, which is so understandable. And yet her moral compass is such that she will stand up. She stood up to every authority figure in her life, when she really, needed to. And I really admired her for that.
Yeah, definitely.
So for me, I will say it's my least favorite of the Austen novels I've read, but I was surprised with how much I liked this. Like, everyone told me it was the boring Austen book. I had fun with it. It was good. It's not as punchy, I think, as like Pride and Prejudice, and not as funny as Emma, but I think it's really good. I do like that it's like a morality tale, as opposed to being a more subtle morality tale like Sense and Sensibility. But I really enjoyed it, and I liked Fanny Price. She really grew on me.
Yeah. I had a very similar experience because the first couple times I read it, I just remember being kind of bored by her. Like I felt like she didn't really have like much of a personality at all. Like not that I disliked her, but I didn't really feel like there was a lot to her. But this time around, like I loved Fanny so much, and like I just want her to be happy.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like she is a much more relatable heroine, I think, in a lot of ways. And like we were saying, like she's not as witty as Elizabeth or as like sassy, I think, as the more popular Jane Austen heroines. But she does have personality, and I think it's amazing. Like we were talking about, I think it's amazing that in the circumstances she was in, she grew up to have such a strong sense of self at all. Mm-hmm. Because she's constantly being told, like, you don't even deserve to be here. Like, you don't deserve to express yourself. Like, you should be, like, grateful for us allowing you to, like, exist in our area. And for her to still grow up with such a good heart and to be so clever. Like, she loves to read, and all of her conversations are very interesting. Like, she has the one about, like, memory, I seem to remember being, like, a big one. Where it's, like, she seems like she'd be such an interesting person to talk to. And I hate that, like, everybody kind of writes her off as just being like quiet and not really having a personality. So yeah, I think as a fellow introvert and conflict avoider, I also really relate to her. And I love that she does have all of this personality. It's like, just because we're quiet doesn't mean that we don't have like anything to offer, you know? So yeah, this time around, I really appreciated her.
I also love the line that was like, had she been given to birth to fancy, and you know, like she's really happy, but she is really quiet, so you don't notice it. I felt that. I really felt that.
Yeah. And there's quite a few places too where like she does like make a joke, or she does like respond to something by laughing, and it's just funny because my perception of her, or what I had remembered of her, is that she was kind of like humorless and I don't know, kind of like Edmund, honestly. Like, and actually, I think she's a much better developed character than him. So we'll get to Edmund later. But yeah, Team Fanny Price all the way. She's great.
Yeah,
introverts unite. Exactly.
I found myself like mentally comparing her to Cinderella for a lot of the book.
Yeah,
because it's like, okay, these are your two girls who are above you, and they're better than you, and we love them more, but yeah, you're still here in our family, I guess. And she was like not letting that impact who she was as a person, even though she was kind of obviously not as mistreated as Cinderella, but
I know
in a similar circumstance.
I got so angry when it was probably Mrs. Norris, because she's consistently awful. But somebody, I want to like push her out a window. Like, she's awful. Like, she says something to Fanny about like how ungrateful she is, and I'm like, have you met Fanny? Like, she's like the poor girl is like grateful for being allowed to breathe your air. Like, how do you look at her and call her ungrateful? So yeah, I feel like we kind of agree on Fanny.
Yeah.
Let's see. So next, let's talk about the Crawfords a little bit, because they are kind of the instigators of like most of the plot, I feel like. So let's start with Mary Crawford. So the glamorous Mary who comes into town and kind of turns everything on its head, along with her brother. Any thoughts on her? Like, how did you guys feel about her as a character? Did you like her? Did you dislike her? Any thoughts about Mary?
I liked her as sort of a villain sort of character, or an antagonistic force to Fanny. I think one of my favorite things, and Edmund pointed it out later, was like, she wasn't a bad person per se. She was bad because she didn't realize that all of the things she was doing and all the things she was saying were immoral, which I really liked.
Yeah.
Sort of ignorance to her own just awfulness.
Yeah, I think it's funny because this time around, and like I'm gonna keep referring to other times I read this book because like the contrast is like so surprising for me. But I remember not liking Mary that much, and this time around I'm like, a lot of the things that people say she's bad for are like not that bad by today's standards. I mean, there's like a few things she says that are like genuinely awful, and just like poor choices where she's like talking smack about the clergy in front of Edmund, and I'm like, did you think this is going to endear you to him? I don't understand. But like the first sign we get that Edmund and Fanny are like uncomfortable with her immorality is when Mary says something about her uncle, like her guardian, like remodeling their house or something, and she says how like dirty and unpleasant it was, and Edmund is just like quietly horrified because she spoke badly of her guardian, and it's like, she didn't though. Like all she said was that it was like an unpleasant experience. So yeah, I feel like there was quite a bit of like the warning signals, I guess, about her were like things that to a modern audience would not seem as bad. But I do think she made for a very interesting foil to Fanny, like an antagonist kind of character. Hana and Julia, what do you think?
I was just about to say how much that foils with Fanny, how she would be like, oh, it's so annoying that my uncle would do this. And Fanny, who would never speak a bad word against the aunt and uncle that are, you know, raising her, even though she has a lot to complain about, but she just wouldn't, especially aloud to someone she hardly knows. So that's interesting. I actually liked Mary a lot more than I did in the movie, which I didn't expect to, because I guess just I got that air from her immediately in the movie, and I was like, okay, look out for this chick. But in the book, I was like, oh, she's kind of charming and fun. So that was different. And I love, this is kind of more of a note on the actual writing than Mary as a character, but I loved that we got all those scenes of just like Mary and Henry talking, which is so different. Like, you know, we never get a scene of just like Willoughby hanging out with his friend or whatever, you know, like it was a different perspective for an Austen novel. And I thought that was so fun. And it like made them feel more like real people as opposed to like, and these are our bad characters.
Yes.
So I liked that it rounded them out a bit.
Yeah. I don't know. In some ways that made me like them less because you got to see what terrible, particularly Henry. I really didn't like Henry. I guess we'll come to that in a bit, but like what a terrible person he is, which you wouldn't have had if we didn't have those scenes of them. But I think you're right, Julia. I think she comes off much meaner in the film. I think she's more not charitably written, but you know, there's more grey to it in the way it's written in the book.
Yeah. Lizzie, or not Lizzie, Freudian slip. Mary Crawford reminds me of like an eviler Lizzie Bennet in some ways, like, because she's kind of the sassy, clever one who would normally be, I feel like, the main character in a Jane Austen book, and instead she's kind of like the bad girl. And like, I don't know, just a lot of her conversations, like a lot of the like clever references she would make kind of struck me as like, this is what Lizzie Bennet would sound like if she had even less of a filter and like a totally broken moral compass. Like, like that's, I don't know, that's kind of what she reminded me of. So maybe that's also why I was a little more, not like forgiving of her, but why I liked her more than maybe a different villain character, is because she kind of reminded me of like, oh, she's kind of sounding like Lizzie and I like Lizzie, so.
Yeah, she is clever like Lizzie, but I feel like she's not very wise like Lizzie is. She just keeps running her mouth, like bad-mouthing the clergy in front of her love interest, which is like just a really bad move. And then when Thomas gets sick, she's like, you know, Edmund, if he could inherit all that cash, would it really be so bad? Like, she's not that smart about keeping her motivations hidden.
Yeah, she's like very impulsive. Like, she does not think ahead at all. I think her and Henry both are like very impulsive characters because they've kind of grown up like, why would I defer anything I want ever? So they kind of are just in the habit of like getting everything they want whenever they want it, and that they don't seem to realize like if they act that way around people, like problems are going to arise.
I mean, she's very kind of selfish, or you know, like she just doesn't really think about how anything, even with Henry, she's not that, you know, concerned about what's good for him.
Yeah.
She's just, she's out of herself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I do want to mention though, like there are several scenes I noticed that where she's like genuinely being very kind to Fanny in a way that other characters weren't. Like even Edmund, who's like so I don't know, so proud of himself for like always taking care of her, which is important, especially when she was little. But there's like a couple scenes where Mrs. Norris or somebody is like humiliating Fanny in front of a room full of people. And Mary Crawford is the only one who notices how uncomfortable she is, and she kind of takes the spotlight off of her. So not that it excuses her other behavior, but I thought it was interesting that even though she is very selfish and self-centered, it does seem like she can genuinely care about Fanny. Like it didn't feel to me at least like it wasn't always a fake, or it didn't feel to me like it was always a fake friendship, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't feel like, I don't know how to phrase this. I guess like Mary would consider Fanny to be her friend, like she said so, but I feel less of a friendship and more just like Mary actually recognizing like, oh, Fanny is a really good person. Wow, like she's genuinely a good human being. And even though she doesn't really see that she's not, she can like respect that about Fanny and kind of admire it in a way, which I thought was cool. But yeah, definitely didn't help her personality at all.
Didn't rub off on her. Yeah, there's a lot of times where Fanny will recognize that Mary did something like not too bad or like even kind of nice for someone, and Fanny's monologue is like, it's like, I feel bad that I don't like her. So yeah, I think it was definitely a one-sided friendship. Yeah, because she does manipulate Fanny quite a bit too. Like it's not all selfless. Like she does use Fanny to get close to Edmund and everything. But I just thought it was interesting that it would have been very easy, I think, to write her as only using Fanny. And I feel like there were times where, like you were saying, Julia, where she's like, Fanny's a great person. Like this is really nice to hang out with a good person. Like it's fascinating.
Yeah, and even though Mary's also quite selfish, I do think, even though she didn't always know what was best for Henry, that she like genuinely wanted her brother to be happy. And she's like, well, Fanny would be the best wife for him. But if he doesn't want her, okay, I'm going to support that. Like just kind of rolling with the punches, which I'm like, okay, I mean, I guess you're kind of a good sister. Like,
yeah, but at the same time, I read a lot of, when she's sending those letters to Fanny when she's in Portsmouth, I read a lot of that as, if Fanny marries Henry, then I'll be close to Edmund. It's not all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's definitely using her.
Very true.
I got she kind of did get on my nerves when she kept pushing Henry on Fanny. Like when she was writing the letter, she's like, oh, by the way, Henry's here and he is looking fine. Don't you at him? Like, after a while, I'm like, please just leave Fanny alone.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of Henry Crawford, let's talk about my favorite dumpster fire. Thoughts on him, because I have many, so I will let you guys go first.
Yeah, I'm equally not the person to start, so
Hana, let's start with you, because I know you didn't like him.
No, I didn't. I mean, I see how he's sympathetic in some ways, but I just really didn't like him. He just, I mean, again, like Mary, well, he's out for himself. He doesn't like when he starts to make Fanny fall in love with him, and he's like, I'll make a hole in her heart, and it's like, and he just the bit where he's thinking about William and he's like, oh, I would like to go and have adventures, and then the next minute he's like, but can't be bothered, and it's just I
relate to that. But yeah,
he's just kind of lazy, and he's into his own pleasure and insincere, and I just didn't like him.
You make valid points.
Yeah, you're right about all of it.
I agree with you, Hana. He was slimy from the get-go. I was like, I'm imagining him as like an incredibly attractive like player frat boy, and I do not like him. He's a little too attractive for his own good, and I don't know, he was a player. He doesn't care about any woman until like he realizes Fanny's a good person and falls for her, and then he won't leave her alone. He just got on my last nerve. He's not as bad as Willoughby, but that's not a
low bar.
Okay,
yeah, very low bar.
Julia, okay. Henry Crawford Defense Squad, let's go.
Here we go. Okay, valid points. I agree with both of you. I do, I recognize he's pretty flighty. He's not the most reliable. His desires come and go, but flaws are important. They're a real thing that people have. Actually, his biggest flaw that bothers me that Jane Austen just had to mention several times is how short he is. Why is he so short? Like Rushworth was like, he's not even 5'9", and I'm like, oh no, why? Why is this happening to me?
Yeah, they made a big deal actually out of how like he's not actually that handsome, but he's so freaking charming that like nobody notices.
Yep.
Yeah, apparently they really didn't like short guys back then because they're like, he's out of the running.
I mean, relatable, but I feel like he did have a lot of character growth, and I think his switch from like, I'm gonna make Fanny fall in love with me because that's a fun challenge, to like genuinely being like, can I get her to marry me? That'd be so great. Like, I thought it was so sweet, and it's not as evident in the movie. Like, I was just kind of like, I think he does like her, and I'm willing to go along with it. But in the book, I was like, he really, really does like her. And that's like, I respect him for admiring Fanny because I too admire Fanny. She's a great person.
Yeah. There's that bit where like he's telling, I think it's what you were talking about, when he's telling his sister Mary about like, yeah, so I did this as a joke and now I have real feelings. And like he just goes on for like 2 pages about how wonderful Fanny is. Like, it's true.
It's so sweet. And of course there's the scene where he's like reading Shakespeare aloud and everyone's like complimenting his reading, and I was like, what? A man after my own heart.
And I think you have a good point, Julia, because like when I was writing down like the notes about Henry, and I'm like, why is he my like Austen problematic fave? Because he is like, he does do some like awful things. And I think part of it is like, he's the only Austen villain who I find believably charming. Like Willoughby and Wickham and like, what's his name? Mr. Elliot from Persuasion, like any of the other ones. Like, I don't even understand why the main characters would like want to spend time with him. And like part of it might be because I've always known that Wickham is the bad guy in Pride and Prejudice. And I think the first time I read Mansfield Park, I think I wasn't really sure if Henry like was like the villain character or not. So that might have been part of it. But it's like I actually care about him as a character. Like I'm interested in what happens to him. And all of the other Austen villains, I'm like, when is your part over? Like I just like, they're some of my least favorite scenes to read. And I think it's interesting for him because he's the only one of the bad boys who has an actual character arc. Like, we can discuss how successful that was, but he actually does change quite a bit in the book. And even like at the end of the book, the omniscient narrator is basically like, yeah, he was actually becoming a better person and he really loved Fanny. And then he screwed up and he regretted it forever. So like he does actually grow, I feel like, which is also kind of exciting. And another thing, which is like totally me as a modern reader, but if you like were to write this story now or like put this in a movie now, like the guy who starts out trying to get a girl to fall for him as a bet, that is always the guy who ends up in the romance. Like that always turns into real feelings because you just wouldn't tell that story any other way. So I feel like that also affects my I don't know, my like sympathy for him is like there's part of my brain that's like in a rom-com he would be like the right choice. Like also I feel like the things that he does, like the running away with Mariah, is definitely bad. And the book even says that like she's obviously going to get the worst consequences because she's the woman and it's not fair. But I feel like that is a much more consensual, that's hard. Why is that a hard word for me to say? Consensual relationship than like Willoughby seducing like a 15-year-old girl and abandoning her, or like Wickham. I think Georgiana was also 14 or 15. Like
she was 15.
Those, yeah, 15. So like not that it excuses what Henry Crawford did, but at least, I don't know, like the thing he did, I'm like, this was a mistake, but I don't feel like it was like you were gross and you were taking advantage of a teenage girl, you know?
True.
Anyway, that was my monologue on Henry Crawford. Sorry, go ahead, Julia. I just interrupted.
I was going to agree because, like, I don't, want to be like, yeah, and it's the woman's job to help the man grow because that's growth. But, like, had he ended up with Fanny, do I think he would have turned out to be, like, a pretty good guy? Yes. Like, I think his personality probably still wouldn't have been, like, the most like stable. I still feel like he'd be kind of that like, oh no, I want this. What if I had that kind of guy? But probably like his morality would have been a little bit stronger with her as
would
his
have been
compass.
stuck with him.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I also like, I don't think it's, I don't know, like he is inspired to start changing because of Fanny, but we see that scene where he's talking about how he helps that poor tenant on his farm. It's so funny because he's describing it. He's like, I did a good thing, and it made me feel good. What is this? Like, so it seemed like I don't know. It seemed at least there that he was like starting to do good things for their own sake. And also, I feel like this is kind of getting into like comparing Henry to Edmund, but I feel like the way that Henry cares about Fanny and talks about Fanny, I feel like he genuinely appreciates her more than Edmund does. Like, there are similarities in the way the two of them view her. Like, they both kind of want to take care of her. And Edmund, when he's talking about taking care of her, it's like he likes having her dependent on him, and he feels like this familial duty to like feed her and clothe her and all of this. And when Henry is talking about it, I think it's to Mary, he makes the point that like he's really excited to take care of her because he's like, I'm going to be able to give her what everyone else should have been giving her. Like, she's going to be like, I get to show off how like amazing my wife is. And like, basically like she's been living in this family of people who don't appreciate her. And like, she's so smart and wonderful. And like, I'm going to be able to take her to parties if she wants to go to parties. And I'll be like, look, this is my cool girlfriend. And I thought that was, I don't know, I feel like that was a nobler motive for wanting to take care of her than Edmund had.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could very much argue that Edmund, I mean, I do think his intentions were genuine in always wanting to look after Fanny, but that his was a little more obligatory in being her family, which, yeah, we don't need to talk about that. That's just
marriage.
Period.
Yeah.
But, he was in the position because he was older and was like, oh, you need help? I'll help you.
Well, and I think at the beginning of the book, what he did for her was super important. Like, he was the first person to actually be kind to her and to take care of her. And I think from Fanny's perspective, like, it totally makes sense to me that she would grow up with this huge crush on him because he was, like, the only one to treat her like a person for a long time. I think where I have issues with it is his feelings for her later in the book, to me, kind of come out of nowhere. And just, like, as a romantic relationship, I don't find it very compelling. But let's actually talk about Edmund before I get ahead of myself. So, thoughts on him, thoughts on his relationship with Fanny. Yeah, Julia or Hana, I don't remember whose turn it is to go first. Or Taylor.
I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Okay, yeah, I didn't much like Edmund either. He's very paternalistic towards her, and he kind of, the way he forgets about her as soon as Mary Crawford arrives on the scene, like he's looking after her in as much as it makes him feel good, but he doesn't. I mean, he does care about her, but you know, herself isn't really his priority.
Yeah. He literally forgot she was in the room at one point.
When they walked away from her, when they were like going through the woods, my heart broke into 1,000 pieces, and they left her for like an hour just sitting there. Like, I genuinely was gonna cry. I was like, this is not okay. Like, I was so sad.
Or the part where I think he just came in from writing with Mary, and he comes into the room and he's like, "Where's Fanny?" And it's like, she's right next to you. Like,
do you mean her on the couch?
Yeah, and also like all the parts where like he's so surprised that Fanny would ever disagree with him, and like he's just using her for his own ego almost, like in some ways.
Yeah,
I
agree. I am not a huge fan of Edmund Bertram. I think he's the dullest of the Austen heroes. I don't hate him. I think as much as I think I'm more frustrated with him because in the beginning I was sold on the romance. I thought it was really sweet that he got her the paper to write to her brother and like read newspapers with her and like they had all these intellectual discussions. And even through like the play, I was like, okay, I kind of see where you're coming from. You know, he's interested in this other hot girl and he's forgetting about Fanny. Like, I get this. But as it kept going, I'm like, so when is he going to fall in love with Fanny? When is he going to turn around and say she's better than Mary? And he kept cousin zoning her.
He called her his sister 20 pages from the end of the book. And I'm like, ew.
Yeah, and then in the end, it's just kind of like, he kind of one day was like, why not? And
you're there. Yeah.
I hated the way that was said.
Yeah, Fanny deserved better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a quote. I'm going to share it, Julia, after you talk, because, yeah, I had some issues with that ending for sure.
Good, yeah. I'm ready for that. I do like Edmund. I don't dislike him. Especially, Taylor, like you were saying in the beginning, there were so many moments like where my heart would swell. I'd be like, he's being so nice to her. Thank you, Edmund. Like, you know, she deserves that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it really rubbed me the wrong way that as soon as he became interested in Mary, like all of his attention went to her. Oh my gosh. And the part where I don't remember the exact quote, but he was like, the two people I love dearest. And I was like, no, why would you do that to her? Like, it's just so painful. And yeah, it just seemed like, although he appreciated Fanny the whole time, well, as much as relatively, that it just seemed in the end like he was like, yeah, I could be happy married to Fanny. Let's do that. And I'm like, I would like a better romantic arc than that, and not just like settling with someone you could be happy with.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead, Taylor.
I was just gonna say it kept annoying me how much he forgot about her, and I don't know. It got on my nerves. It's like, oh, here's Mary, and like looks at smudged writing on hand. What do you do?
Yeah. I know, and even though like he didn't know that Fanny had this like massive crush on him, I feel like all of his interactions with her, almost all of them, like all of his long conversations with her were like he was basically using Fanny as like a dumping ground for all of his feelings. Mm-hmm. Like occasionally he did do something that was like really like genuinely kind for her, and like he did look out for her more than anyone else in that family. But like there's that part where they're dancing at the ball. And Fanny is like so excited to be dancing with Edmund, and Edmund comes up to like take her out for their dance, and he's like, oh, I'm so exhausted, I've been talking to everyone, but you'll be okay if I don't talk to you. This is great. And like that, I feel like that's kind of representative of like their relationship in a lot of scenes. Is he like, I don't know, I don't want to say he uses her because he does care about her, but I feel like it's very he like doesn't, he thinks about like caring for her in the context of like, I need to look out for her because my family doesn't treat her well. But when it comes to like individually one-on-one, like, hey, Fanny, like, how's your day going? Like, what are your problems you want to complain about? It's like, he never even thinks about it. And he's also one of the people who's like trying to push her into marrying Henry. So like, he just does not know her as a person, it feels like. So what, Hannah? Sorry.
No, there's also the bit after Henry and Mariah run away and he's like, oh, I'm sure you're feeling bad, but think about how I must be feeling.
Yes. I like marked that line because he literally says, but think of me. It's like, you need to calm down, Edmund. Yeah, I feel like he's such a hypocrite too. Like he's supposedly like this very moral person, and then as soon as Mary wants to do something, it's like it must not be that bad if Mary's doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so,
he still complains about Mary's morals. He's like, oh, he's not that morally focused, but whatever, I'll just do what she wants me to do.
Yeah, or like he kind of bends over backwards to explain why actually what she's doing is a good thing. You just can't see it. Like,
like, oh, it's because of her friends that she's been spending time with. Oh, they're a bad influence. It's like, or that's just how she is. Like,
and I think part of it is that like he's supposed to be so moral and Fanny's supposed to be so moral, and I think individually, especially with Fanny, I don't mind, but together for some reason it got on my nerves. I'm like, okay, stop being so judgmental. Stop being so good.
Yeah. Yeah, especially because like Fanny is just like a genuinely good person, and I feel like she had moments of like when Mariah and Julia were like fighting over Henry, basically, and Fanny was like thinking to herself, like, even though it's wrong for Mariah to, like, she's engaged and she's like going after this other guy, like Fanny recognizes that it's wrong and she does kind of judge her for it, but she also, like, it says that she feels bad for her because of the situation she's in. And I feel like Fanny is like a very moral person who is open to being compassionate for people who do wrong. And Edmund doesn't really strike me like that. Like, he just feels inconsistent to me about like how he applies his morals. Yeah. So here's the quotation from the end of the book when it's talking about Edmund and Fanny ending up together that like really bothered me. With such a regard for her, indeed, as his had long been, a regard founded on the most endearing claims of innocence and helplessness, and completed by every recommendation of growing worth, what could be more natural than the change? Loving, guiding, protecting her, as he had been doing ever since her being 10 years old, her mind in so great a degree formed by his care, and her comfort depending on his kindness, an object to him of such close and peculiar interest, dearer by all his own importance with her than anyone else at Mansfield. What was there now to add but that he should learn to prefer soft light eyes to sparkling dark ones? Like,
yeah,
it's weird. He's like, you know what really turns me on? The way that I just like take care of you and you're totally dependent on me for everything.
The way that I molded your mind.
Yes. Like, he's like, oh. And even when they're younger, I think he's like an older teenager at that point. And she's like 10 or 11. And he's like, this is great. He's like, I get to tell you all the right books to like I get to put all of my knowledge in your brain. Like, it feels weird to me that he's like, it straight up says that like he's attracted to her because he created her. Like, yeah, it's a little weird. Yeah. And he's also like, that's pretty flattering that you've been in love with me your whole life. Yeah, let's get married. Like,
yeah. He literally settles for her because she's the next best option.
Yeah. Yeah. And because she's like always been there. And he's like, this is super convenient. Like, yeah. I know. I have so many issues with the way this book ends because like I'm not even saying that, oh, I wish Fanny would have ended up with Henry, even though I think that could have been a really interesting end, like if he had actually like stuck to his character arc. But I just feel like Fanny and Edmund, like I think Fanny is settling too. Like I think she can do so much better than him. And I feel like it feels to me like that situation where you have like one of your friends who is with a guy who you're just like, you can do so much better. Like I know, like I know you're happy, and I'm glad you're happy, but like you could do better.
I want more for you.
Yeah, it's like I want more for you because you can't see it yourself. Like, yeah,
I mean, like really? It's fair that she couldn't see it because she spent her whole life being told that she's not going to amount to anything and can't aspire to marrying anyone. So like, it makes sense why she would think that marrying Edmund is great, but. Yeah. It's just the reader that knows that she could do so much better.
Yeah. I would have mentioned that Cassandra Austen, so Jane Austen's sister, apparently wrote her sister a letter complaining and saying you should have had Fanny marry Henry because he's more interesting. So like,
wow, the original Henry Crawford Defense Squad.
It's like even like a few hundred years ago when she was writing this, like readers were like, really. Yeah, I just find that like so funny. Like there have been shipping wars since time immemorial.
Yeah. Oh, I love when people are like, and people wrote letters to Louisa May Alcott saying, "Why didn't Jo end up with Laurie?" Like, I love it. Old-timey ship wars.
I feel like we're bonded across centuries with these readers who were like, so upset about it. Yeah.
It's like the Fanny Edmund relationship is weird to me because in so many ways, I think it's really similar to Emma and Mr. Knightley, but like they're so superior of like a couple somehow. I don't know if it's just because like Knightley's regard for Emma was like so high even before she kind of deserved it. And like he actually recognized those feelings in himself, but I don't know, because I just think they're very similar. Like they knew each other a long time and he's a bit older than her and they kind of had the friends to lovers thing. And
I feel like part of it is that the turn happens a little sooner in the book in Emma than it does in Mansfield Park. Like in Emma, like you kind of get the sense that Knightley has I don't want to spoil Emma, but spoiler alert, but you kind of get the feel that he's always been sort of in love with her, and then there's like this sort of turn where he does realize he's in love with her, and it's not the last couple pages of the book. It's a while, and there's still a little time to get that like good angst going and all that stuff. Whereas with Mansfield Park, there isn't really a turn where Edmund realizes he's in love with Fanny, and I think if we had gotten that more than like 5 pages before the end of the book, I think things would have been I think we would have a little bit of a different opinion of Edmund.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned like that we don't see Edmund's turn, because I think that's a really big reason why the ending feels unsatisfying to me and to other people, it seems like, because it all happens off page. Like the narrator just tells us that what's the line where she's like, I know you're not going to buy into this, so just imagine whatever length of time you find most appropriate, and then after that exact amount of time, Edmund fell in love with Fanny. Like it's so weird, because we don't actually see any of these huge like character things that happen. Like even Henry Crawford running off with Maria, which honestly, like the more I read this book, the more I feel like that was not out of character, but I feel like it was kind of out of line with his like development almost, like because the narrator even says like he was genuinely becoming a better person. Fanny probably would have fallen in love with him at some point because it was sticking, like he was actually becoming a better person. And then it's like, oh, well, he just like ran off with Maria, like don't worry about it. And it's like, why? Like this came out of nowhere. Like not that he wouldn't do something like that, but I thought that that was like earlier in the book, Henry. And it seemed very, very weird that would happen now. And it kind of felt like convenient, because otherwise how would you explain Edmund giving up on Mary and ending up with Fanny, unless like Henry did something so bad that he just like wasn't an option anymore.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, like, what was Maria saying to him when he was visiting? Like, I want to know what kind of interactions they were having. Which is not to say that like he's not, I don't want to hold him accountable for that, because like he made a stupid choice and it was really bad, and it turned out very badly for Maria, whereas he probably had very few consequences, except like losing the love of his life apparently, which is pretty sad. But yeah, it's just like the way it's written, I think feels very odd, because it's like, why did we spend so much time developing his character then? Like he had this like really interesting arc, and even if you weren't going to have him end up with Fanny, I think he could have done it in a more, I don't know, I feel like Jane Austen could have written it in a more convincing way than like, oh yeah, you know how he doesn't care about Maria anymore? Well, apparently he cares just enough about her to elope with her and ruin everything. Like, yeah, because theoretically, like, she could have just run off with anyone, and then had Mary been like whatever about that, and so blasé, like that would have been enough to turn Edmund off of her. And so like some of those events could have fallen into place without Henry having kind of backpedaled on his development.
Yeah, because if that was going to happen, I almost wish that like we didn't even get that character development for Henry, because I'm like, I'm disappointed in him, you know? It's like, we were rooting for you, and then he just threw it all away. So yeah, it kind of feels like a missed opportunity, where like, where do we go now with this like interesting like character that you created? It's like, oh, he just ends up being like basically the same as all the other Austen bad characters, except you're sadder about it maybe.
I don't know, I feel like I almost read it as Fanny was, I don't know, like it was Fanny was right not to trust him and not to marry him, because however much he had started to change, he was still the same person underneath.
Yeah, that's a good point. I kind of feel like the book overall is saying like people don't change. like that's one of the messages we were supposed to get for it, which actually is one of the things I wanted to ask you guys about. One of the things I think is really cool about reading her novels in like approximately publication order, or like the order she wrote them in, is to compare like the timeline. So this was written, like we just read Pride and Prejudice last month. this was written right after she like seriously overhauled Pride and Prejudice, because she started writing it much earlier, but it was a completely different book at that point. So for all intents and purposes, she wrote Pride and Prejudice, and then after that, she wrote Mansfield Park. And I wanted to know if you guys like had any thoughts on that. Like, do you feel like there's any connection between them? Like, do you think she was actively trying to write something that was not Pride and Prejudice in any way? Yeah, what do you guys think about that?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Because I have some thoughts, as always. So
I would say it's very different. And I mentioned this like way earlier, that it's a lot less punchy than Pride and Prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
The main heroine is a lot more, I think, traditional to the time period, whereas you always hear Lizzie Bennet being like Jane Austen's feminist character, or a girl ahead of her time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Mansfield Park is very much a more traditional story. It's not as like 21st century feminist as Pride and Prejudice would be. It's, like I said, it's very much a morality tale. And what you said about, in Mansfield Park at least, people not really changing and always retaining an element of their former self, I think that's also kind of a different message than what Pride and Prejudice was, where both of the characters had to essentially change a lot about themselves before they could come together.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I had written down too, is like, it almost seems like, and I think I wrote a paper about this in college, which is probably why I'm still thinking about it, but it almost seems like Jane Austen was writing some parts of this book to like warn young girls who fell in love with like Pride and Prejudice and Mr. Darcy. It's like, sometimes trash men stay trash. Like, do not, like, not everyone is a Mr. Darcy. Which, you know, it's a little different because in Pride and Prejudice, I feel like one of the things you realize is that Darcy, it's not like he becomes a good person after being a bad person. It's like he's been a good person and he's just really awful at interacting with people. So like his change is more like, I guess like social kindness and things. Like, he's always been a good guy at heart, but he treats people badly. Whereas with Henry Crawford, obviously, there's a lot more like moral issues going on. But yeah, I think it's very interesting that there are a few parallels I noticed. Like, even one of the first lines of the book, like, obviously, you know, Pride and Prejudice has the famous, like, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a large fortune must be in want of a wife. And one of the lines on the first page of Mansfield Park is, but there certainly are not so many men of large fortune in the world as there are pretty women to deserve them. And I don't know if she deliberately did that, but that was something I pegged right away. I'm like, this is almost like a direct callback to like Pride and Prejudice being like, sometimes you don't get a rich man, sometimes you don't even get a good man. Like,
that's very true. I remember that line, but I didn't think about connecting them that way.
Yeah.
And I agree with what you said about Mr. Darcy, because I have never, I mean, Pride and Prejudice, unpopular opinion, is not my favorite work of Jane Austen. I know it's a lot of people's favorites.
I'm basic. I love it. So it's okay.
I don't dislike it, but that's what I've always said, is that I don't think like Lizzie or Mr. Darcy change very much. I think it's like willful misunderstanding of one another, because it's like, this is my opinion I have, and I'm going to maintain it until I have reason for it to change. And so I don't think either of them actually change anything about themselves. I think they just kind of change their mind on things, and that impacts like how they interact with one another, really.
Yeah. And I almost wonder, like, comparing Mansfield Park to Pride and Prejudice, I almost wonder if the ending of this book is supposed to feel a little bit unsatisfying. Like, I don't know, not that she like deliberately wrote an ending people wouldn't like, but Pride and Prejudice is like considered one of her more like romantic books. And then Mansfield Park definitely doesn't feel that way. Like, even the main romantic relationship we've kind of been discussing doesn't feel super romantic. So I almost wonder if she was like consciously kind of trying to show you that like sometimes you get a like decent guy who wants to take care of you, and he's not a bad person, and that's like the highest happiness you can get, you know? Like, because I mean,
take that. That's fine by me.
Yeah, she's almost like, all right, set your sights a little lower. If you can't find Mr. Darcy, maybe Edmund will be around. Like, Yeah, I don't know. Like maybe that's just because like I have a lot of dissatisfaction with the ending that I'm like, maybe we're supposed to be dissatisfied with it. But it's like I don't know. I mean Fanny is super happy, so like in a way, like I'm glad you got what you wanted, but you should have wanted something better. Yeah. Okay, real quick, there's a couple like thematic things I want to talk about before we kind of move into like I know we're almost at an hour here because there's a lot to talk about in this book.
Yeah,
we have a lot of feelings.
Yes, there's so many feelings with this book, and I do want to give you guys a chance to talk about just like any random like character or line or something that you want to discuss. But there are two themes that I like really wanted to talk about from Mansfield Park, and one of them is the way this book kind of talks about but doesn't really the slave trade, because it's kind of implied that that's how the Bertrams might have made their money, because we find out that their like new money, which probably would have been from trade, and when Sir Thomas just like disappears for a huge chunk of the book, he's going to Antigua to like take care of some very like dangerous business or something. And there have been like lots of scholars who wrote much more eloquent things on this than I like I'm saying now. But basically there's like some discussion about like, does he own like a slave colony? Like, is that how the Bertrams made their money? Like, is he maybe like when he goes off to Antigua, is he like in trying to put down like a slave revolt or something? And I remember that was one of the things our professor talked about when we were studying this novel. And it wasn't something I had picked up on before because I had only read the book once and it was a long time ago when I was younger and blah, blah, blah. So I was surprised by it. And I was like, oh, like, I don't remember it being like specifically mentioned. But there is like an actual scene in the book. Let's see if I can find it.
It's just mentioned very briefly in passing.
Yeah. Oh, that scene that you blinked and you missed it. I remember that scene.
Yeah, where Fanny is talking to Edmund. Yeah, where Fanny's talking to Edmund about like Sir Bertram has come back, or Sir Thomas, I mean, has come back, and she's like, but I do talk to him more than I used. I'm sure I do. Did not you hear me ask him about the slave trade last night? I did, and was in hopes the question would be followed up by others. It would have pleased your uncle to be inquired of farther. And then Fanny says, and I longed to do it, but there was such a dead silence. And while my cousins were sitting by without speaking a word or seeming at all interested in the subject, I thought it would appear as if I wanted to set myself off at their expense by showing a curiosity and pleasure in his information, which he must wish his own daughters to feel. So like, when I saw that line this time around, I was like, where did this come from? Like, so Fanny apparently noticed or wanted to talk about the slave trade for some reason. And I think one of the things that I'll try and remember to link the article if I can find the one I was reading, but they point out that Jane Austen, some of her favorite writers that she talked about were very famous abolitionists. So I don't know. I just wanted to know if you guys like picked up on that, if you have like any thoughts on it. It's obviously not given a lot of page time in the novel, but I think it's interesting that there were any references to that at all. So yeah, if you guys had any thoughts about that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no, say what you're going to say.
No, please go ahead.
No, so I'd marked that line as well, Cara. But hearing you read it just now, it almost, I don't know, makes me wonder if Austen just didn't want to engage with it, or even if she was an abolitionist at heart, she kind of like she mentioned it, she put it there, but then she just found an excuse not to talk about it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me wonders if this was just a very small way to mention that she was not totally crazy about this whole slave trade thing. That little thing that happened.
Right, that little asterisk.
But she didn't want to outright say like, hey, slavery sucks, because that's probably way too political. And Jane Austen's books, while they are social commentary and like feminist critiques of the society at the time, they're not overtly political. And I think just mentioning the slave trade in and of itself is probably pretty radical for what is not really considered like abolitionist work. Right. Like this was like a genteel like ladies novel, and they actually used the word slavery. Like they didn't even like use a euphemism or something for it. And also, Taylor, you can probably answer this better than I can because I have not actually read Sanditon yet.
I like know of it and I've seen a little bit of the miniseries, but isn't one of the characters in that story, isn't one of the characters, I think, biracial, maybe? Like, I don't think she's a main character, but I think I think I wrote down Miss Lamb is the name of the character.
I don't remember. It's been years since I've read Sanditon, but now I have to reread it.
In the
miniseries,
she's black.
In the miniseries, she definitely is.
Okay.
I think in the book it's barely mentioned because the book is so short and
right,
unfinished. Yeah,
it's like a fragment.
Like 11
yeah.
chapters, right?
Now I have to look out for that. I will say that Mansfield Park, I think, has always gotten a bigger rep as Jane Austen's anti-slavery novel, even though it's not. Because my copy of Mansfield Park has chains on it.
Yeah. You liar.
Yeah.
Behind that.
Yeah. Are those the necklaces? Is that what we're supposed to think?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Oh, it could be a necklace. That actually makes more sense. I'm like, look at these chains.
The gold chain.
I don't understand. Like,
that makes a lot more sense.
For those cloth-bound books, I just don't know why they chose those for all of them.
Yeah. Some of their design choices are interesting. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Glad you said that.
Yeah. Like I think that's a good point because I think it's interesting it's mentioned at all, but like I think one of the reasons I was so surprised when my professor had brought it up is like it's such a small part of the novel. Like there are some very direct references to it, which is more than most novels of the period would have. But yeah, it's not like this is an anti-slavery novel. Mm-hmm. So I almost wonder if like she was like I don't remember if it was Hana or Taylor who said this, who's like she's trying to slip in a little bit about how she doesn't really approve, but she's not making like a big moral stance about it. I don't know, maybe she was gonna do more of that in Sanditon and we just don't know.
I did read an article that said that when Fanny was trying to like teach Susan and sort of like give her more books to read, one of the poets or like authors that she recommended was a very vocal abolitionist. So to have Fanny be a fan of like, I think his name was Trace or something.
You might be right. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah,
that's a good point. So there's like little like subtle references to it, but she's not. Yeah, like you wouldn't be able to pull out a line and be like, see, Jane Austen was, a prominent abolitionist, because she wasn't. She was pretty quiet about it.
Yeah, that had me totally confused when I was reading because I had that expectation of like, Jane Austen talks about slavery in this book. And then when I finished it, I was like, am I a bad reader? Like, did I miss those scenes? Literally in the one that you read where she was like, and I asked him about the slave trade. I was like, was I daydreaming? I don't remember her asking him about the slave trade.
Yeah.
It just gets so little page time that it's like very, very subtly done.
Yeah.
Especially because in the movie, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say in the movie, because my first introduction to Mansfield Park was the film. In the movie, it's such a big part of the book.
Yes, they make it a big plot point.
Yeah, and it's not well done, but it's there.
It's not. Yeah. Yeah, and also that Fanny was the one to bring it up, was like very surprising. Like I think that might kind of be in line with what we were talking about her, where it's not like she has like very strong opinions about things, and she just is not welcome to share them usually. But sometimes she does. Like she speaks up when she thinks, I don't know, when she thinks like she needs to. But yeah, it is interesting too because we're never told what Sir Thomas was doing, but I would imagine the only reason somebody would have land in Antigua would be a slave colony, right? I mean, a plantation of some kind. I don't know why else they would have land there.
At some point in the book, they also said the word plantation, and I was like, okay.
Yes.
So, I was trying to piece it together, but I don't think it's very...
It's definitely not overt.
They were referring to was the land in England that they owned.
Okay.
Could be connected.
Because it could. Yeah.
That's a good point too, is it might have been a more general reference. And then if you guys have any other thoughts on that, we can talk about that. But the other theme I wanted to ask you guys about is the acting and use of theater and how that, I know, me and Julia are like, ready, how that functions in the book, because that was another thing I was surprised about this time, is I remember that being like a big deal. And it is, like, it's very significant in like character relationships and everything, but maybe this is from the movie version, but like I remember it being like a huge shift when like he comes home and catches them and he's like furious and like everything is ruined forever. And in the book, it's just kind of like he was mad for 3 days and then it's fine. So, any thoughts on like how you think performance functioned in the book or with the characters, anything like that?
Well, I am a big fan. I think, well, okay, let me back up a little bit. So I really like Shakespeare, right? Okay, so I try to read a lot of Shakespeare retellings, and I recently realized that my favorite ones aren't like actual explicit retellings, but are ones where it's like, we're doing the play, and the themes of the play are paralleling our own lives. And I think that's what I liked about the use of the theater moments in Mansfield Park, is that it's like, well, here we see Edmund being a stick in the mud because the play's not moral enough for him. And like, you know, Mariah's being like, oh, I should be this part. Oh, okay. And Julia's being jealous. And it's like everything that's happening within the play is mirroring things that they're really feeling. And it's just like an excuse for Julia to be jealous. But really, she's jealous because Mariah's getting the attention from Henry. And so, like,
yeah. And they're rehearsing their first scene together constantly. Yeah.
And I think it's just a good, like a good, what's the word I'm looking for? Like excuse for drama, because I think things always like boil over when there's all that pressure of like, and we want the performance to be good. So it's just a heightened sense of feeling.
Yeah, definitely like the heightened emotions, and the fact that this was a like slightly acceptable way to spend time with men alone and everything. Like it's a way that they can get around all of these societal rules and inhibitions and everything. It's like there's very few opportunities where Mariah or Julia would have been able to be alone with a man they weren't related to. So that would have been considered like very shocking. At Edmund and Mary too, of course, like as soon as he realizes he's reading with Mary, he's like, maybe it's not so morally reprehensible.
It's like, well, I wouldn't want her to be uncomfortable acting with this guy she doesn't know, so I guess I'll play that role. Like, okay.
I feel like it's very indicative of Edmund's moral compass, is like he talks himself into thinking he's doing the good thing, and it just so happens that the good thing is always the thing he most wants to do. And Hana and Taylor, before we hear from you guys, I forgot to mention at the beginning of this section, have any of you guys like looked up Lover's Vows, the play that they were doing?
I wanted to so badly though.
You did? Okay, so just like very briefly, because I didn't read the whole thing yet, but basically one of the reasons Edmund was so upset they were doing this play is that a huge part of the plot revolves around one of the women having an illegitimate son, because she was seduced by this like baron or something, like out of wedlock, and it was like very shocking. And I think that might have been the part that Mariah was playing, which would have been like very shocking. And the fact that she has to, like, she was an engaged woman and she was saying these things about like being overpowered by passion and all of that. So that's kind of the context, is like this would have been considered a very racy play when they were doing that. So now if you guys have thoughts about it.
The other thing I wanted to throw in is I believe there's kissing in Lover's Vows.
Is there really?
I believe God. That's the one thing I remember when I looked at the play. Like, there's kissing, and that was also kind of why they like Edmund was like, I don't know about this.
I didn't realize that. That's so funny.
I believe so. I would look that up maybe also, but I am pretty sure there's kissing.
It's pretty
okay.
spicy.
Yeah, this was like the like X-rated of like Jane Austen's time. It's like,
oh, you're doing 50 Shades of Grey, the play? Wow.
Yeah, I will say that on top of the particular play they're performing, just this book as a whole is just, I think, probably the most racy or scandalous one. When you throw in the whole affair thing. But yeah, I have nothing else to add to the play other than that there's kissing.
I like what you were saying, Julia, about the parallels with the play and the rest of it. I think also for Fanny, because it's kind of the first time we see her really putting her foot down, and they're like, "You're going to be this part," and she's like, "No, I'm absolutely not doing it." And then, like, it's kind of an example of that before she then, for a much more serious thing about Henry later, is kind of the introduction to that.
Yeah, she's definitely not a pushover. Like, she really like sticks to her guns when she knows what she's doing is right. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point. It's like a really great kind of, and Julia, you were talking about this too, kind of exposing the characters for what they what they have been all along. I remember getting really irritated when we discussed that part in class, because our professor was saying, like, well, Henry being the best actor is significant because it means he's a really good liar. So he's like a dishonest person, because I just remember because there was me and there were, I think, one other theater kid in that class, and we were both kind of like, no, that's like, that's not at all true. Yeah, so I just personally think that Henry being a good actor was used in the sense that, like, for one thing, Fanny admired him kind of against her will. Like, we see that when he's reading out loud to them, and we also see when she's watching the rehearsals of the scenes, she's like captivated. Like, she's really, because she's never seen a play before too, so she's actually excited to be seeing it. But I also think it's interesting that she's kind of drawn to watching him, even though she still doesn't approve of him and she still doesn't like him or anything. And I also think that this is part of Henry's charm, because it's like, if a man would read Shakespeare in a really beautiful way, I would probably be like a little more on his side than I was before. Like,
Yep.
Julia, the way to our hearts is simple.
Yeah. Like, you don't even know. Okay, so I'm not like a big person of like watching The Bachelor and all that, but I saw a clip from Bachelor in Paradise where John Paul Jones was like, and I memorized this monologue from Romeo and Juliet, and I was like, well, you're the best person in this whole thing, and I love you, and you're so charming and cute. Okay, bye. Like,
Yeah.
That's how easily sold I am. So.
Yep. I understand. Let's see, is there anything else that I wanted to talk about? Yeah, so we talked about, like, being in this very intimate environment, kind of getting around like all of these restrictions about spending time with people. I also think it's interesting, like, Mariah's character and Henry's character, until I looked up the play. So, like, I had known the story of this book for years before I knew this. She's playing his mother.
Oh.
And I feel like that's a little weird, because, like, they're describing their opening scene as if it's this really great, like, romantic moment, you know, like, she's like, I think, is she holding his hand to her heart, or like he's holding hers or something, and there's like physical contact, and it's very scandalous. So yeah, it wasn't until later where I'm like, that's his mom. Like, the people who run off, the people who elope together, they played like parent and child, which I find interesting, considering the fact that cousins end up married in this play. I don't know, like, I don't think that was deliberate, but I just remember being like, uncomfy. So, okay, I think that's all my notes on the play. Do you guys have like other things you want to discuss, like any side characters? I think we all agreed that Mrs. Norris should be just ejected from something. Like, she's the worst.
She she cousin zoned Fanny from the first. I mean, like, page 12, she was like, and if we raise them together, they'll never be attracted to her. It's like, oh, girl, you're brutal. She's just trying to live her best life. Oh,
also, clearly didn't work. Yes.
And you're wrong.
You're wrong. Yeah, I know. There were several references to them being raised as brother and sister, and I couldn't figure out if that was just them being general about the fact that they were cousins, or if they actually raised them in a way that was like closer to siblings. Because I'm like, I know that marrying your cousin was okay in this time period, but if I was raised with somebody as if they were my sibling, like, I don't think that's something you just like work around, you know?
Yeah.
Like, get over.
I don't know though. I mean, she's treated so differently and so badly from them. I wouldn't call that a sibling relationship. I mean, not that that makes it any better, but.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, that she was raised, like, she wasn't actually raised as part of the family. So yeah. That makes it a little less creepy. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, at least Fanny's not 15, so small victories.
Right. You know, like, Gold Star, not as much of a jerk as you could have been. Like, this could have been worse. I also, like, really quick, what did you guys think about Mariah and Julia? Because, like, I found them more sympathetic than some of the, like, mean girl characters are. Like, I feel like Jane Austen was writing about them in a way where we're not supposed to condone what they do, but like we can feel a little bit of pity for them. I think I marked a quote where it's talking about, I think, is it Mariah? I think it's Mariah, because she's the one who runs off with Henry later. Yeah. Sorry, I have so many quotes, you guys. So it's talking about like when her dad gives her the option to get out of the marriage and she says no. And it says, Henry Crawford had destroyed her happiness, but he should not know that he had done it. He should not destroy her credit, her appearance, her prosperity too. He should not have to think of her as pining in the retirement of Mansfield for him, rejecting Southerton and London, independence and splendor, for his sake. Independence was more needful than ever, the want of it at Mansfield more sensibly felt. And then it goes on for a little bit. She must escape from her father and Mansfield as soon as possible, and find consolation in fortune and consequence, bustle and the world, for a wounded spirit. Her mind was quite determined and varied not. So, like, I just thought that was interesting because, like, Julia and Mariah are not terribly nice people, but I feel really bad for her there because, like, I understand why she made that awful choice, because it's like, you know, you've been rejected by this guy who you love, who clearly doesn't love you, and it's like, well, I don't want him to think I care, so yeah, I'm going to stay in this loveless marriage. I don't want him to ever know that he hurt me. Like, it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face, but I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I might be a little biased with the name.
You know, Julia being the best.
Well, and also just like, I felt Julia's pain of like, oh, I like this guy and he likes that girl more, and it's just this unrequited crush. Like, I felt for that girl. I just when she would, I forget what happened specifically, but I think it was in regards to the play where she just like stormed off and she's like, well, then I won't do it. Like, bye. If I can't have that part, then forget it. Nice knowing you all. I was like, you know what? Honestly, that would be me too. Like, I would be annoyed and I would be like, well, have fun without me.
Especially when the girl is your sister or someone that you're close to. Like, to have to watch somebody that you're close to, like, getting the guy that you want is, I also...
And when Mariah, like, by all propriety, shouldn't have been in that kind of relationship with Henry.
Yeah. I know, it's kind of like she shouldn't have even had the option.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, like, I could have gotten the order of events wrong, but isn't it, like, Julia eloped, but it's not as bad as, like, when Lydia eloped as much, because she eloped out of panic once Mariah, like, ran away with Crawford. She like hurried up and married Yates because, like, what are her options going to be? Like, her family is like, Mariah's ruined her reputation.
Yeah, that was like the smartest decision to make, honestly. Like, because it seems like Yates is like not actually a bad guy. Like, he didn't have as many debts as everyone thought, and like he genuinely liked her and wanted to make like a good impression on her family. So like Sir Thomas eventually forgave him and everything. But yeah, I remember like, because I was like, oh, I forgot that Julia like ran off too. And then it's like, straight up, she just knew that things were going to get worse. So she's like, might as well take this guy I like with me. And I'm like, that was, honestly, what else could you have done? Like, she's like, my dad's going to lock me up forever. So.
Yeah. And I do also feel a little bad for Mariah because she is stuck in a marriage with a total...
Oh my God.
Like,
I hate Rushworth, and I know it's not fair I hate him this much because he's not actually a bad person, but like, he's so stupid that it offends me. Like, it's like Mr. Collins, kind of. Like, you're not like malicious, but I could not stand to be in the same room with you, I think.
Yeah. And like, she can't leave him. And I think, you know, there's this extra sympathy with, like, they have to get married. They have no choice, really. And then once you get married, you're stuck with that person forever. So I do kind of feel bad for her, especially because it is someone who's not that smart.
Not great all around. Yeah. Even Sir Thomas is like, the less time I spend with this guy, like, the happier I can lie to myself about like how happy they're going to be together. I also like, I get the feeling that when Sir Thomas offered for Mariah to back out of the engagement, which like that was a nice thing to do because that would not have been the norm. Like, that was more thoughtful than I expected, honestly. But even when he did that, there was kind of this feeling that like he didn't actually mean it. Like, or afterwards when she says no, like she's going to stay in the engagement, he's like, oh good, like I didn't actually want to have to do all of that, so this is great.
Well, it would have been a hassle to
and like
everything.
Rushworth is like super rich and has all this consequence and everything, so he's like, theoretically you had a choice, but you picked the right one.
Yeah, but thank you. This is the better choice for us.
Exactly. Any other like favorite parts or lines you guys want to talk about before we wrap up?
I have a quote.
Yeah,
sure. Off my phone. Of course, it's Henry, but I love, this is really early in the book. This is like page 50. And he says, I am of a cautious temper and unwilling to risk my happiness in a hurry about getting married. And I'm like, honestly, same. It's like, you don't want to jump into something because you're like, oh, I might want that. And then be like, actually, that's not what I like at all. So even though he's kind of our antagonist, I was like, I respect that point of view.
Yeah, he's an antagonist that I actually like care about what happens to him, which I think is a big point in his favor. Because like honestly, any of these other bad guys, I'm like, if a carriage ran you over, I would applaud. Like, I mean, honestly, not a very nice thing to say, but
they're fictional. We can say it.
Right? Exactly. It's a theoretical thing. Yeah. I know, Henry. What a dumpster fire, but any other thoughts or things you guys want to share?
There was a quote that stood out to me, and I pulled it up in a Bustle article because for Hana and Julia, I do the audiobooks. So it's like I'll see a quote or hear a quote, I'm like, that's a good one. Out of my head.
Yeah, it's gone.
I
liked it.
Yeah.
But this one's from Fanny Price. I think it ought not to be set down as certain that a man must be acceptable to every woman he may happen to like himself. And it really did sum up why Henry Crawford stressed me out, because he kept pursuing Fanny after she said no.
Yeah, he did. That's like a big mark against him, because I'm not a fan of that. Yeah.
Even I also like his change. Edmund, that rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah, and like Edmund and Mary and like Sir Thomas and everybody was like shoving Fanny at Henry, and it's like she said no. Like leave her alone. Like
respect her choice.
Yeah, I know. That really bothered me. I love that line though. I think I also marked that one because it's like, you go, Fanny. And I think she says it to Edmund, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Because Edmund's basically like, why wouldn't you love Henry? And she's like, well,
yeah.
Because you don't know me as a person, clearly.
I respect it, but can't relate. That's my fatal flaw, is anytime someone has a crush on me, I'm like, do I like them back then? Like, thank you. And then it turns out I never do. But that's a different issue.
I think what we've learned from this, Julia, is that you and I would definitely have been taken in by Henry Crawford.
Absolutely, yeah.
100%.
And then I would be messy enough for like him to potentially still try to elope with Mariah after our marriage, and I'd be like, but wait, come back. I still like you. Like, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. No.
I like you more. Come on back.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. There was something else I was going to say, as if I haven't talked enough, but there was something that you reminded me of, Julia. Now I can't remember what it is. We were talking about Edmund.
Before that, Cara, I think I've paraphrased most of the quotes I liked. I also marked many of them.
Yes.
But one I like that we haven't mentioned is about Fanny. Had her confidence in her own judgment been equal to her exercise of it in every other respect? I think that just sums her up so perfectly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh. Fanny is such a great main character. Like, I'm so happy we did this reread, if only so that I know that Fanny is like the most underappreciated.
I'm so happy all four of us like her. Like, that just made my day.
Yeah, she's great. I have no idea what I was going to say, and I've clearly talked a lot already, so that's okay. Taylor, do you want to talk real quick about the Emma live show before we wrap up?
Oh, yeah. So our next book for Austen Anonymous is Emma. It'll probably happen near the end of April. Not April. What month are we in? I don't know where we are.
It's May. Time is gone.
Like near the end of May. I'm gonna pull up a calendar so I have some sort of semblance of when that would be. So we're probably thinking or we probably will think like the last Sunday of May, which would be the 31st.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, we have to talk with our other co-hosts, but that's when it's going to be. And so I will keep everyone updated this time around.
And that's going to be on your channel.
That'll be on my channel, and I'm really excited. I love Emma. Might try to do a watch along with the new film, but
That's right. I know. I still haven't watched that one yet. What's like the streaming price? It's something absurd. It's like almost the price of like, which I guess makes sense, but I'm still mad about it.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not going to pay that much for a digital experience.
Well, I mean, considering Onward went on Disney Plus like 2 weeks after they allowed you to like pay to stream it, and now it's like just free if you already have Disney Plus. I'm like, well, isn't there some kind of deal we can do for Emma? Come on now. Like,
wouldn't that like a Jane Austen? A Jane Austen streaming service? Like,
yes, I would do that. Or even like a period drama one.
Except what?
Like a period piece one? Like
oh my gosh, they would get all of my money. They could charge like $100 a month, and I'd be like, yes, I love it.
Like, I'll watch all of it.
Yeah. Oh my God, before we stop, I think we're getting close to the end from what it sounds like. Can I just share, because I'm really annoying, I basically threatened on Twitter. I was like, I will absolutely recreate the She's the Man poster with all of these characters from Mansfield Park, because like the love web is so messy. And I've done it.
Oh my God.
And I need you all to see it. I don't know the best way to show you.
I think you can share your screen.
Okay. Because I tweeted it. Okay, here, right, ready?
Yes, please.
I love that other you made of like Edmund carrying Fanny. I think you made that.
Can you see it?
No.
I don't know how to. Let me share that. Oh, okay, wait. There.
Okay, here we go. Julia's screen.
Yes. So, everybody has a secret. Henry wants Fanny, who likes Edmund, who's really her cousin, whose sister is dating Mr. Rushworth, so he hates Henry, who's with Julia to make Mariah jealous, who's really crushing on Henry, who thinks she's inferior to Fanny, and it just goes on.
Oh my God, I love
Mansfield, the park.
Julia, can you send that to me?
Yeah, can you send that to me too?
Please.
Thank you, because I was laughing just making it. And I was like, so few other people are going to be entertained by this.
I love it. Like, it's my favorite thing. I love the one too you made, which with like the floor is resisting Henry Crawford's jars.
There's something about reading a classic novel that just really brings out my inner meme queen, and I just want to make all these stupid things.
It's one of my favorite kinds of humor. Like something about combining something like really classy and like highbrow with like weird ass memes is like my favorite.
That's why I'm obsessed with the SparkNotes Twitter account.
Oh my God. Twitter account, period.
I love it. Yeah, like every time they do a Shakespeare joke, I'm like, this is the greatest moment of my life. Like they did one about Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing the other day. It's like, sure, he's hot, but would he challenge Claudio to a duel for the sake of his beloved cousin? And I'm like, this is my exact brand of humor. I love it.
Oh man.
Okay, so I think that's everything. I really have no idea what I was going to say. It was probably bitching about Edmund some more, so just like assume I did that.
That's easy to assume.
Yeah, safe to assume. Okay, so thank you guys so much, everybody who joined us. Thank you so much to my guests, Julia and Hana. We love discussing this with you. And of course, thank you to my co-host, Taylor. I am so glad that we have been doing this. Like, I have so many thoughts about Mansfield Park, as is very obvious. Like, Julia, you're gonna love this, because in my Goodreads review, I described this as the measure for measure of Jane Austen for me, because it's not my favorite, but I will like write a paper on this like at the slightest provocation. So yeah, so I'm so glad we got to do this. And thank you everybody for joining us. And like Taylor was saying, the next one will be Emma, and that will be on Taylor's channel. And it'll possibly be the 31st, but we obviously have to check in with our co-hosts and everything, so keep an eye on the Twitter account and everything for that. But yeah, thank you guys. We love discussing this with you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, thank you. And I'll see if the end broadcast button actually works. It takes a couple minutes sometimes.